The chill of the stone floor seeps into my skin. In the flickering lamplight, my master's face is a mask of cold fury. I'm not a citizen. I'm not even considered a person under the law. I'm property. And tonight, I'll be reminded of that fact with the bite of the whip. This is the untold story of the women who faced the harsh realities of Roman justice. Not in the courts, but in the shadows of their own homes. Rome. Just saying the name brings to mind grand architecture, disciplined legions, and a legal system that laid the groundwork for Western civilization. We often hear that Roman law was a triumph of order and reason. But that's only part of the story. The scales of Roman justice were never truly balanced. They were tipped from the start by one brutal truth. Your status meant everything. For women, this reality was inescapable. Your safety, dignity, and very life depended not on your actions, but on who you were, a cherished daughter of a citizen, a foreigner with limited rights, or a slave with none at all. This isn't just a story about justice. It's a story about power and the terrifying consequences for those who are powerless. We're about to uncover the dark side of Roman justice, a world where the snap of the whip was a constant threat, and a woman's body became the final ledger for her supposed crimes. To grasp who faced the whip in Rome, you first need to understand the rigid hierarchy of Roman society. At the very top were Roman citizens. A woman born to a citizen father was a citizen herself, and with that came a shield of legal protections. The proud declaration, Civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen, was meant to defend against the worst abuses of power. For a female citizen, her life was governed by the authority of the familias, the male head of her household, first her father, then her husband, while this patriarchal system placed her under his legal protection. It also meant that to harm her was to offend him, a serious matter. In principle, a Roman citizen, regardless of gender, couldn't be subjected to the most humiliating forms of corporal punishment, like flogging or crucifixion, except in the most extreme cases. Beneath citizens were non-citizens, the vast population of free people living within the empire who didn't hold that coveted status. These women had fewer rights. They could run businesses and live freely, but they lacked the legal armor of citizenship. In disputes, they were more vulnerable, and in criminal matters, they faced a harsher reality. While they weren't property, they didn't possess the same honor that Roman law was designed to protect for its own. At the very bottom were the slaves. In the eyes of Roman law, a slave was not a person but a thing. The legal term was raised simply. Property, the same word used for a chair or a cart. A female slave had no rights, no legal personhood, and no bodily autonomy. Her owner held the power of life and death over her, and the law granted him almost complete authority to enforce his will upon her body. This distinction isn't just legal trivia. It's the key that unlocks the entire system of corporal punishment. For one woman, a misstep might lead to a stern talking to from her father. For another, the very same mistake could mean the lash. When we think about whipping, it's easy to picture a simple leather strap. But the Romans, ever efficient, had a specialized arsenal of pain. The instruments of punishment weren't just tools. They were symbols of absolute authority. First, there were the rods, or virgi. These were bundles of birch or elm sticks, wielded by the lictors who accompanied magistrates. They represented the state's power to punish. A beating with the virgi was painful and humiliating, designed to correct and chastise. But for the gravest offenses, almost exclusively for non-citizens and slaves, there was something far worse. Enter the flagrum, or the scourge. This was a short, stout wooden handle attached to several long, heavy leather thongs. What made the flagrum so horrific was that the thongs were often studded with sharpened pieces of metal or jagged bits of bone. Each strike was designed not just to sting, but to rip and tear. The flagrum didn't just bruise skin. It flayed it, gouging into the muscle beneath. It was an instrument of torture, crafted to inflict maximum pain and turn a person's back into a bloody, unrecognizable ruin. Literary sources from the time speak of its effects with chilling casualness. The poet Horace and the satirist Juvenal both mention whippings as a part of everyday life, a common occurrence in households. For a female slave, the mere sight of the flagrum in her master's hand was a promise of agony. These weren't just punishments. They were visceral demonstrations of power, where the line between discipline and sadistic cruelty was left entirely to the whim of the person holding the whip. For the vast majority of women who felt the sting of the lash in the Roman Empire, they weren't criminals in a legal sense. They were slaves. And for a slave, punishment wasn't determined by a court of law, but by the mood of their owner. A female slave was a financial investment. So punishments were often brutally calculated, harsh enough to enforce obedience, but not so harsh as to render the property useless. However, this was a cold calculation, not a guarantee of mercy. Offenses that could warrant a flogging were as minor as they were numerous. Forgetting to refill a wine jug, speaking out of turn, or simply displeasing a mistress in a moment of vanity could be enough to see a woman stripped and beaten. The Roman writer Juvenal famously quipped that some noblewomen would order a slave whipped simply because their own nose displeased them. The punishment was often a performance, a strategic tool of household management. A whipping could be done in private, but was often administered publicly in front of the other slaves. The screams weren't just expressions of pain. They were warnings, brutal lessons in compliance for everyone who heard them. There was no legal limit to the number of lashes. No trial. No appeal. An owner's authority was absolute. Attempting to escape was considered one of the gravest offenses a slave could commit, and the retribution was savage. Upon capture, a runaway female slave could expect to be whipped without mercy. The pain intended to permanently erase any thought of defiance. But the whip was often just the beginning. The punishment could escalate to branding with a hot iron, marking her as a fugitive for life, or being condemned to the mines, a slow, grueling death sentence through forced labor. In the most extreme cases, a defiant slave could be thrown to the beasts in the arena. Her death turned into public entertainment. These weren't just punishments. They were acts of calculated humiliation, designed to reassert total control and strip away every last shred of a woman's identity and hope. While Roman citizenship was a powerful shield, it wasn't unbreakable. There were rare, terrifying circumstances under which a free Roman woman could face the ultimate degradation of corporal punishment. These exceptions reveal the absolute power the Roman state could wield when it felt threatening. The most significant crime that could strip a citizen of their protections was treason, or maestas, during the paranoid reigns of certain emperors like Nero. The definition of treason could be terrifyingly broad. An accusation of conspiracy against the emperor could see even high-born women facing punishments normally reserved for the lower classes. Historical accounts suggest that during these periods, women could be subjected to whipping, exile, or execution. However, the most infamous punishment, reserved for the most heinous crime a Roman could imagine, was the Poena Cullei, the penalty of the sack. This was the prescribed execution for parricide, the murder of one's own parent or close relative. This punishment was a masterpiece of ritualistic horror. The convicted person, man or woman, was first whipped with rods. Their head was covered with a bag made of a wolf's hide. Then, they were sewn into a heavy leather sack. But they weren't alone. With them in the sack were placed a collection of live animals. A dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. The sack was then thrown into a river or the sea. The logic was as symbolic as it was cruel. The person who had destroyed their own family would be denied a proper burial, devoured by unnatural companions, and erased from the earth. While exceedingly rare, the existence of the Poena Cullei shows that, for a crime considered profoundly unnatural, the state could inflict a punishment that was equally so, overriding all normal legal protections. For a Roman woman, adultery was another path that could lead to severe legal penalties. Under Emperor Augustus, a woman found guilty of adultery could be exiled to a remote island, a social death sentence. While this didn't typically involve whipping, some accounts suggest that in certain cases, public humiliation could include corporal punishment, turning her shame into a public spectacle. From the casual brutality within households to the ritualized horror of the state, the story of corporal punishment in Rome is a tale of inequality written on the body. For a Roman woman, justice was a fragile concept, entirely dependent on her station in life. A citizen was shielded by law and honor. A slave was protected only by her financial value. Her body a canvas for her owner's rage and a tool for control. The whip, the rod, and the scourge were more than just instruments of pain. They were tools used to enforce a rigid social hierarchy, a constant, physical reminder of everyone's place. The screams of a beaten slave were meant to echo through the villa, reinforcing the master's absolute power. The public parading of a disgraced adulteress was a warning to all women about the price of transgression. This is the dark side of Roman justice, a system where the law wasn't blind but saw status, class, and gender with perfect, unforgiving clarity. It forces us to ask a fundamental question when we look back at any great civilization. Is its character defined by its grandest monuments and loftiest ideals, or by the way it treated its most vulnerable and powerless members? The unheard stories of the whipping women of Rome suggest the answer lies in the shadows. If you want to keep exploring the hidden and often brutal realities of the ancient world, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more dark history. Let us know in the comments what other aspects of Roman life you'd like to see uncovered.